it! I'm Coy Jandro, a Bostonian who loves pop culture, comic books, and people, and I host Coycast. It's a podcast about all those things. If it fits in on a con floor, we talk about it on Coycast. Myself and producer Jake do previews, reviews, deep dives, and tinfoil hat theories about everything from movies, TV, and the comic books themselves. I also like to dish out comic recommendations from my 100-plus pull list a week so you know what's best to buy. So join us, True Believer, on Coycast.com or wherever you're listening to this podcast right now.
It's the greatest mystery in literary history. A divisive question with highly contested answers. Who was the writer behind the pen name William Shakespeare? Welcome to Don't Quill the Messenger. Here's your host, Stephen Sable.
Hello, my fellow Quillers, and welcome back to another wonderful episode of your favorite podcast, or at least I hope it is among your top 10. And if it is, I hope that you will go to wherever it is that you find this series and give us a rate and a review. We are so fortunate that we have had such wonderful growth in our audience for this series, and that we've had so many wonderful reviews, but we could always use some more, and we would always love to have you go and give us some comments in a public forum. We get wonderful emails from you all the time about each episode, and I love that. But also tell the world. That's the only way we can change the world. So today, on today's episode, so many of you over the 3 years of the existence of this podcast, and more than 75 episodes now, I'm starting to lose count, in fact. So many of you have either written to me or contacted me in other ways to ask about why I believe what I believe, why I am an Oxfordian, why I do this series, why the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship would sponsor such a series. And so many of you have been newcomers to the question, and I'm thrilled about that. And I think that all of us as Oxfordians are thrilled to see so many of you new names and faces that are interested in this greatest mystery of all time. And one of the things I can tell you that if you haven't already embraced, you need to go to the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship website and look into the How I Became an Oxfordian series. It's a magnificent series. It has more entries than I have episodes of this podcast. There have to be well more than 100 or more, if not approaching even as high as 150. I don't know exactly, but there are so many wonderful entries there. Maybe I'm exaggerating. I can tell you who would know. Bob Myers would know, because he's been the curator of the series since its inception. And so he would know exactly how many people have sent him the answers to the questions that they ask for the series. And each person highlighted there tells their story about how they became an Oxfordian. And one of the things that I love about the series is the wide range of people, their backgrounds, their influences, their career choices, their vocations and avocations throughout their lives, and how they came to this mystery and why it's so important to them. It's a wonderful series. So go to ShakespeareOxfordFellowship.org, and you'll find the website and you'll find that series. And it's a fantastic series with new entries regularly from people all over the world and from all over different backgrounds. So many of you have wondered, and you can find mine. Mine's in there. I'm one of them. It was a wonderful interview to conduct with Bob several years ago now, where he asked me the questions that are the stock questions for each new Oxfordian featured. And it was a great time. And some of the things I'm going to share with you today are actually in that entry. And some of them are not. Because mainly what I want to talk about today is my Oxfordian milestones. And it's not truly for the purpose of making this about me. It's about recognizing that each of us have our own journey, our own path through this mystery. When we find it, how we find it, who shares it with us for the first time, what influences come about during our exploration, when we're asking our questions, where we seek those answers, which answers speak to us best or most clearly. I think all of those are aspects of post-Stratfordianism and the Shakespeare authorship question as a whole. And I think anyone who is interested in this topic would agree that we all have to follow our own path. It's one of the reasons why the great theme of this series has always been keep asking questions. Each of us needs to continuously keep asking our questions to find our answers and to come upon our truths. I think that's one of the beautiful things about this mystery. And I think it's one of the beautiful things about the Oxfordian movement. And I think it's true that most people, and I know there are some high profile people still today who hold great sway in the Shakespeare authorship question, who disagree that the answer is Oxford. I always want to, and as you know, if you're a regular listener of this series, you have seen me always welcome any guest who has any theory or any answer or anything to add to our quest for the truth that will help us find the truth about who is the real person behind the name William Shakespeare. Well, for me, I was a teenager when this was first introduced to me. It was the friend of a high school friend. It was the father of a high school friend who first mentioned it to me. And I was at their home, as I was wont to be regularly at that point in my life. Good friend, great home, great family, and always welcome there and always felt welcome there and was always glad to be there. And one night where I was there and what was on the television was Kevin Kline's Hamlet. It's that at the time it was made, and I didn't look this up before doing this episode. I'm going to guess sometime in the 80s, but you can all Google that. Anyway, Kevin Kline's Hamlet, modern dress for that time period, which was a great thing at that time as well, because it truly proved what Hamlet can do and how it can transcend. And Kevin Kline is a magnificent Hamlet. I would put him up there with one of the best Hamlets I've seen. And while the show was while the film was playing on the television, the father of the house, his name was Mr. Perry Angle. So Perry was impressed with Kevin's delivery of, the 6 signature soliloquies that are Hamlet. And having played Hamlet twice, I can tell you that is where you start. You start with that. That's the foundation. You get those down first and you fill in the blanks after that. And that might sound callous for a 1,500 line role, but excuse me, it's a 1,500 line role uncut. Most people cut it down to around 1,100, just over 1,000 lines to make the show palatable. But nonetheless, it's still the largest role ever. Of any true merit in that sense. And wow, it's a lot. You have to do it twice just to do it right. I can tell you that. And that's a confession I just made to all of you listeners. Anyway, Perry says to me, while we're watching Kevin Kline do Hamlet, William Shakespeare didn't really write William Shakespeare. And that's one of the things I think that all of us who follow this question hate anyone to say, because it simplifies and clouds the issue in ways that shouldn't be. Number one, yes, William Shakespeare wrote William Shakespeare. The question is, who was the man behind the name William Shakespeare? And the answer is not William Shakespeare of Stratford. Once you get people over that hurdle, then you now have a new realm. And when Perry explained it to me, that's what he eventually explained to me. And he said, Christopher Marlowe. Yeah, Christopher Marlowe. He said, Christopher Marlowe. He said it had a lot to do with Marlowe's homosexuality. It had to do with Marlowe being a double spy for England and France believing he was a spy for them. He mentioned the Earl of Sandwich. He said that Marlowe was the protege of the Earl of Sandwich and a spy throughout Europe. That he died mysteriously in a tavern on the docks, stabbed through the eye. That his death was staged to avoid the political persecution that was coming for him by being such a spy who was willing to create and commit such horrible and dreadful mortal sin in order to accomplish the goals of the state. Yeah, figure that one for a minute. But that after his fake death, he hid in seclusion and wrote the works of Shakespeare. And he said, you need to find a book called The Murder of the Man Who Was Shakespeare. Now, the reason I can recall all of these details so clearly to you right now is I'm holding in my hand the piece of paper that on that day I wrote notes from what Mr. Perry Angle said to me. And I'm holding those notes right now as I record this episode. I have saved this piece of paper. It has been valuable to me. I have had this piece of paper in my life for more than 30 years. Because for more than 30 years, I have questioned the traditional story, thanks to Mr. Perry Angle. One of the things that he said to me was, if you really want to know the truth, then you need to read the sonnets. The secret, he said, is in the sonnets. Well, I'd never really paid much attention to the sonnets other than a particular couple, the most famous ones like Shall I Compare Thee to a Summer's Day. Whoever teaches the sonnets, if there are any English teachers out there, if you're not teaching the sonnets, please do, because they don't get taught enough anywhere. And they are indeed a crucial part of the secret. But what Mr. Angle said to me was, you have to read them backwards. They're in reverse order, and they tell you the secret if you read them backwards. So you know what I did? I went and I got myself a copy of the sonnets. I read them frontwards. I read them backwards. I read them everywhere in between. Here's what I found. More mystery. More mystery. What? Wow. I never read the sonnets. Didn't even really know they were part of the canon other than the couple that had been like force fed to me by a English teacher here or there. And once I read the sonnets, I went, wow, there's definitely a secret here. There's definitely something here. And what I discovered originally in my mind was a love triangle. So, wow, there's a love triangle here. What I find is a love triangle. Why does he hate her? Because she loves him, but he loves him. They both love him, but he hates her, but he loves her. It's a really trippy, weird love triangle. And for a long part of my life, I spent a long time trying to figure out, what does that love triangle mean? But that didn't really start at first. I read the sonnets as Mr. Angle asked me to. I discovered what I thought was a love triangle, and I moved on. I was a teenager. I moved on. I was on to other things, probably girls mostly. You know, I was a teenager. Theater was a big thing. I was doing plays, not reading plays. Graduating from high school is a big difficult, complex thing. So I really didn't delve further into it. Then I was a young adult in my early to middle 20s. I was a journalist. I worked for a small community newspaper, and part of my responsibilities was, take a giant guess, this is going to shock all of you, I was the entertainment editor for the newspaper. So one of my principal roles was critic and reviewer of theatrical productions. And I was attending a production at the Lawrence Welk Theater in Escondido, just outside of San Diego. And we went there regularly. They did 4 or 5 shows a year. Wonderful pieces. Later on, in fact, when I became the director of a private high school theater program, I started purchasing the used sets from Lawrence Welk. Would drive out to Escondido, pick them up by truck, and then bring them into Riverside, California, and put on shows. But I digress. Anyway, I'm at the Welk, and the woman who ran the dinner theater portion of the Welk. So when you went to the Welk, you could either just get tickets for the show, or you could get tickets for dinner and a show. But dinner wasn't served in the same space as the theater. It was served at the restaurant, which was just a short walk. It was a pleasant short walk, in fact. But you would drive up to the restaurant, go sit in, have dinner, and then finally, finishing dinner, you would walk over to the theater and take your seats and see the play. Well, the lady who ran the place, I'm sure she's passed on by now. God rest her, wherever she is. But the lady who ran the place insisted at that time, and imagine this is, God, I'm going to age myself and date myself, but we're talking about the 90s, right? Middle to late 90s. Actually more later 90s, like 98, 99, 2000. Anyway, this lady's policy was she had so many tables. And if you were a table of 4, if you were 4 people, you got your own table of 4. But if you were a table of 2, you sat with some other table of 2. And she would just sit people together, strangers who never knew each other. And you just knew when you went to the Welk that you're going to be sharing a table with another couple. And it was fabulous every time. We met wonderful people. We got to know some wonderful people. And one night I sat across from an actress who was performing in a play, I learned through our dinner conversation, and she was going to play the role of Queen Elizabeth I. Queen Elizabeth I, she said. I said, wow, I'm really curious. Like, what's the play? And she said, it is a play about the Shakespeare Authorship Question. And of course, my, antennae were peaked and up. Really? What's it about? Like, tell me, how's it going? She tells me that she is doing a live performance, costumed, staged reading of a play written by a playwright called Elwood Leroy Miller. Eric to others who have known him. Eric Miller. Elwood Leroy Miller. And she's going to play Queen Elizabeth. And the play is about Queen Elizabeth and the Earl of Oxford and their relationship, and how he has been punished by her, that he must not ever put his name on any plays, and his writings, and on and on and on and on. And I get her name and I get her phone number, and I end up calling her. And then I track down the phone number for Eric Miller, Elwood Leroy Miller. And, remember, I worked for a newspaper at the time. And I was actually known as the Society and Cultural Arts editor, because the community I lived in had a lot of society clubs. with very wealthy people. In fact, at the time, it had more millionaires per capita than any other city in what is known as the Inland Empire of Southern California. And a lot of these people were very involved in the community and very, very philanthropic, and held lots of big banquets and society galas and balls. And my job was to go to all of those and cover all of those, as well as provide the entertainment features, stories, and reviews for the newspaper, as well as, feature story, general feature stories. I was a feature editor, feature writer for the newspaper. So I convinced my managing editor to let me do a story on Eric Miller, and did a giant spread on him and his plays and the Shakespeare Authorship Question, and some of the sources that he mentioned, and his explanation as well about how Sigmund Freud was also a Shakespeare doubter and Oxfordian. And it was a very successful story. At the same time, I was also creating the Redlands Shakespeare Festival. And I knew right away by that point that I was going to constantly and forever throughout my life and career as a producer, director, journalist, marketer, and now podcast host, that I was going to always promote Edward, serve Edward, bring to life Edward, make sure that this man who has been stripped of his due finds the justice that he deserves. And I was fortunate that I had a managing editor who said, yeah, write the story. Let's do it. Let's throw it out there. And then in my Shakespeare Festival, we made sure to include something about the Shakespeare Authorship Question, Oxfordianism, the Earl of Oxford in every season program, which we did in sort of a newspaper format. Go figure, a newspaper man knows how to put together a newspaper format program. And then we also would hold these annual debates every year during the festival at the local library for the public to attend. And we would find somebody who, actually one of the members of the acting company, was always the staunch Stratfordian who would debate me as the staunch Oxfordian, for the public to be there, hear our arguments, and ask their questions. It was wonderful. It was educational to everyone. Some left unconvinced, others left wanting to ask questions. It was a fabulous aspect of 9 seasons of the Redlands Shakespeare Festival. Miller was the one who turned me on to Twain's Is Shakespeare Dead? And if you haven't read Mark Twain's Is Shakespeare Dead, then go get it. Go find it. Go read it. I ordered a copy at that time. Remember, this is early 2000s, I'm saying, right? So about 20 years ago, a little less than 20 years ago, maybe. So I found this copy that I am holding in my hands right now as we speak, that is a reprint from Kessinger Publishing Company. And it's called Kessinger Publishing's Rare Reprints. Thousands of scarce and hard to find books. And it's terrible. It's accurate, but it's, brochure format. And as cheaply made as it could possibly be. But I found it and I got it back then and I read it and I went, wow, what? Wow, that's kind of incredible. Mark Twain. Well, Samuel Clemens ought to know something about pseudonyms, and he obviously believed that William Shakespeare's a pseudonym. Well, Eric Miller, Elwood, Leroy Miller also said, you need to read a guy named Thomas Looney. He said, don't let the name put you off. So I went and tried to find a copy of Shakespeare Identified in Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford, by J. Thomas Looney. And I was able to find one. And it was a General Books LLC publication. And if Jim Warren's listening, he's turning right now. He's like spinning circles right now because it's a terrible, terrible version of Looney's work. And if you really want a great version of it, get Jim Warren's centennial version that he produced, because this piece that I'm holding in my hands is a collector's item because of how horrible it is. Typos everywhere, transposed letters. It's like a horribly scanned and computer interpreted copy. But it was the only thing I could find at the time when I purchased it. And I read it and I was blown away. But I'll tell you one of the books that Elwood Leroy Miller, Eric Miller, told me to get that was most important to me. And it took some searching and finding. And it is the Tennessee Law Review, Fall 2004, Volume 72, Number 1. And this book that I was able to finally get my hands on at his encouraging introduced me to new names that I had never heard before and the writings of those people. And that changed my life as an Oxfordian. This book, the Tennessee Law Review, it's a symposium of articles. And it says right here on the cover, who wrote Shakespeare, an evidentiary puzzle. And let me just tell you some of the names that are here. First and foremost, not first and foremost on the cover, but first and foremost, that's most recognizable to all of you, I'm certain, is Roger Strittmatter. Here's some others. Diana Price, Richard Whalen, Peter Dixon, and several others who write so wonderfully and so compellingly in this piece. And this book changed my world, not only because of it being so new at the time and so relevant and so insightful, but also in introducing me to these names that I then followed from that point, and the other work that they did and the other things they accomplished and the other works they led me to. And one of the final ones that Eric Miller told me I must read was, of course, The Mysterious William Shakespeare, The Myth and the Reality, written by Charlton Ogburn. And that's another volume I have here in front of me that I cherish. And that's the foundation that I can thank this chance encounter with this actress in Escondido at the Lawrence Welk Theater that led to all of that. From there, of course, the next thing that happened to me was Mark Anderson's Shakespeare by Another Name. And when you add that book to all of this, it's a done deal from there. If you read Mark's book first, I think it can be a done deal. But then it will lead you to these. And it doesn't matter what order you find all of this. And I think that's one of the most important things I can tell all of you fellow Quillers. It doesn't matter what order you find your truth. All that matters is that you keep seeking the truth. Am I guilty of seeking information that will better validate what I already believe. Of course, I think that's all of us. I'm more interested in this because I believe this to be true. I'm going to go and try and prove it. But when and if we fail to prove it, and we acknowledge that, what's the harm? When and if we find someone else's argument more compelling, even if it flies in the face of our belief system or our motivation for wanting to believe what we want to believe, which we're all guilty of as well, then I think we have a problem. I think that can be an issue. And we'll talk about that a little bit further into this episode. So one thing I can tell you is the volumes I just mentioned, and if you don't pause and then go back and list them out and then get them, you should. Okay. So I encourage you to do that. But I mentioned that as the founding artistic director of the Redland Shakespeare Festival, it was important to me. I was going to convince the world, and I still hold true to this, and I think all of you listening know this to be true. One Oxfordian at a time, damn it. One Oxfordian at a time. And if I could do that through my festival by having an annual debate, by putting information about Edward de Vere in the annual program, we had performances sometimes were attended by more than 3,000 people a night. So if you're reaching between 15 and 20,000 people a season and you're introducing them to Edward, then maybe you're making a difference. If 20 of those people show up at a workshop that is a debate on this issue, you just reached 20 more people. There was a time in my life I worked for an estate planning law attorney. And the model for the organization that he was a member of was, you did these lunch and learns or dinner learns where you invited people to come have a free dinner at Marie Callender's or wherever it was. And they got a free dinner, and then part of the deal was they had to listen to his presentation about why estate planning is so important. And then you'd sit in the back and hope they'd come and sign up. And one of the messages of the company, the association he was a member of, and one of the things I learned tremendously about marketing is it truly is about a formula of how many bodies you can get your message in front of. And it's one of the reasons why I am such a firm believer in the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship's Speakers Bureau, and how I believe the Speakers Bureau is such an unused, untapped resource for our organization to be able to reach more people. It's about the number of bodies you can get your message in front of. So if it's a 20-member Rotary Club or a 15-member library readers group, or the Seroptimist Club who is interested in the topic, or whoever you can get in front of, whoever you can get a knowledgeable person in front of, that's that many more people who may embrace this mystery and want to ask their questions to find their truth. And I'm a firm believer in that. But so as I was embracing my questions and my truth, I was trying to invite other people. And one of the things that I stumbled upon was the Shakespeare Authorship Coalition and John Shahan. And I reached out to John, who lived very near to the Redland Shakespeare Festival site. And I said, he was like an hour or so away. I said, hey, would you come out? We do this debate every year. Would you come out? He's like, I would love to come out. And John came out and attended one of the debates and brought the Declaration of Reasonable Doubt. And if you haven't signed that, Quillers, what are you waiting for? Go sign it. Go read it. Read it from top to bottom. Read it again. Read it 3 times. Read it 5 times if you must. Then sign it. Because if you read it, you will realize that what it says is we promote research. We believe there's enough question to say, keep asking questions. It's the most keep asking question document in the entire Shakespeare Authorship Question history. So if you haven't signed it, go sign it. Doubtaboutwill.org. Doubtaboutwill.org. Find it, go sign it. So I invited John to the Redland Shakespeare Festival, which he, of course, agreed to do, and brought the proclamation. I don't know if there were any additional signers that were developed on that day or not. It doesn't matter. It was that many more bodies that the message was in front of. Then I discovered that Michael York is a fellow Oxfordian. Now, some of our newer, younger members maybe don't know Michael York as well. There's an entire generation that knows him through the Austin Powers movies, where he was the eye patch wearing commander of the spy forces. Of course, those of us who are older and who are lovers of Shakespeare film know him as being the only person who is in 2 Franco Zeffirelli Shakespeare films. And he plays Tranio in Taming of the Shrew with Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. And he also plays Tybalt in Romeo and Juliet, the famous Romeo and Juliet starring Olivia Hussey, and that scandalous, what would be called today, I think, probably child pornography, because she was literally 14 or 15 years old and doing nude scenes in that film. You would never get away with that today. But it's a Zeffirelli classic, and Michael York was in both those films. So I reached out to Michael York, and he is, ladies and gentlemen, one of the most gracious people that I have ever had the pleasure of even briefly encountering. He and I exchanged emails and phone calls for more than 3 years, trying to get him out to be a guest of the Redland Shakespeare Festival. And most of the time the festival was always in May, and most of the time spring was a very busy time for him, including one time when he was on tour playing Arthur in Camelot, and said, if my touring schedule brings me close to you, I will gladly come over. That's Michael York. I tried to lure him. There were people in Redlands who had private planes. I said, we'll fly you in a private plane. The Redlands Country Club is one of the oldest country clubs on the West Coast. He said, we'll set you up with golf. You know what he said? He said, oh, yes, golf. The most perfect way to ruin a walk in the park. He was not a golfer, and he did not like golf, but was so gracious about it. I didn't actually end up meeting Michael York face to face until I attended my first Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship Conference in Pasadena. He was very ill at the time, and God bless him for still attending and being there. He suffered a tremendous bout of illness and still attended that conference. And I finally got the chance to meet him face to face and say hello, and he was as gracious as ever. Just a wonderful soul and a wonderful Oxfordian. And but that was my first Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship Conference. And one of my highlights of attending that, well, first of all, I could drive there every day from where I was. It was an hour away, which was nice. I know many of you who have attended SOF conferences who've had to fly from thousands of miles away and really put it on your map and really save the money to pay the airfare and the hotel and the registration. And it's a commitment. It's a commitment to go to an SOF conference. I have never regretted it. I have always gleaned so much and have always enjoyed so much from every conference I've attended. But it was so much easier that first time in Pasadena to just drive there every day and then drive home every night. But one night I was graciously invited to an after dinner and a strategy meeting occurred. And it was when, and I know that if you've listened to past episodes, you've heard me talk about this before. It was when the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust was putting out their book, Doubt About Will. And it was a huge thing at that time. And that dinner was all about that topic. We were out on a patio, and we took up the entire patio of the group, and a lot of debate and discussion occurred about how to counter what was coming. And, no, sorry, I mentioned that. That's the wrong title. Shakespeare Beyond Doubt. That's what it is. Sorry. Shakespeare Beyond Doubt. And I'm looking up here at my, it's terrible when you get older and you can't see the titles of books on your bookshelf without having to move to see them like closer. Yeah. So it's Shakespeare Beyond Doubt. Shakespeare Beyond Doubt, ! I believe is the SBT, Shakespeare Birthplace Trust title. Shakespeare Beyond Doubt ? Is what believers in the authorship question countered with. And it was decided that night, and I'm so proud to have been a part of that night, that evening, that room. Of course, me being the theater guy, I said, well, if you want to get a message out, write a play. That's what our guy did. And everybody looked at me like I was crazy, I think, especially I was a newbie. Nobody even knew who I was back then. And I was like, well, when Edward de Vere wanted to get a message out, he wrote a play. He put on a show. If you really want to change people's hearts and minds, put on a play, put on a show. He knew it. We know it. We all know it. And I still am looking forward to collaborating with the best minds who can give me, because I'm not as skilled in this as people think I am. This is the truth. I'm making confession to you right now, Quillers. Here's what I really want. I want the best minds of this to say, what are the top 10 moments in Edward's life that we can find mirrored in the canon? Give me details, letters, historical documents about those 10 moments, and then the scenes from the plays that are those 10 moments being played. And let me write a play from that goes back and forth between the real Elizabethans into costumed performers, back to the real Elizabethans, back to costumed performers. And we really demonstrate live before an audience how much this man's life comes off the page. That's what I believe is something we definitely need to do. But I need some help doing it. So if you want to help me, write to me. Contact at don'tquillthepodcast.com. Contact at don'tquillthepodcast.com. Anyway, back to my Oxfordian milestones. So that moment at the Pasadena conference, that after dinner, was monumental. It was wonderful to be a part of that and to see that all take shape, and then to watch the publication come out. Follow up, now that I had made more contacts with SOF and had now finally joined the organization, thanks to John Sheehan directing me to them, like helping me find them. I made contact with Bonner Miller Cutting, and you all know her. If you're listeners of the program, you know Bonner. She's been a guest of the program multiple times. One of the most gracious ladies I have ever known, and so sharp and so smart, and knows every date of every person's entire life. So she could help me with the play that I need to write. She came out to the Redland Shakespeare Festival and did her presentation about the amount of penalties, torture, and punishment that the writers of the Elizabethan era suffered, all except for one. And if you haven't seen Bonner's presentation on that, you can find it at the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship YouTube channel. It might take you a little hunting. Just type in Bonner Miller Cutting torture. I think that might help you find it. I don't know for a fact, but I'm guessing that will probably find it. It's a fabulous presentation, and I use one of her points whenever I give a presentation on Oxford 101. I always talk about John Stubbs, the unfortunate John Stubbs, who ends up losing his hand. Yes, it's true. You can't write this stuff. You literally cannot write this stuff. He's a great example of the type of totalitarian censorship that this world lived under. And I think that's a crucial part of the Shakespeare Oxfordian story. It got to the point where in my Shakespeare Festival, which closed Memorial Weekend every year, and on Memorial Day Monday was always our strike, and we would go and we would tear everything down, put it all away, and then we'd have a big barbecue for the cast and crew. I started calling it the DeVere family reunion, and I told everybody, show up here on Monday, Memorial Day Monday, at this park any year, and this is where you'll find us. Well, that was true for 9 seasons, but then I opened my theater in LA, and things were progressing there, and I just couldn't juggle it all. And I married Annie, and we started having children, and I just couldn't juggle it all. And so I had to give up the Shakespeare Festival and move forward with other pursuits. But we did. We used to call it the DeVere family reunion, and every member of that company knew every year where I stood on who the author was, and they didn't have to believe it. They didn't have to believe anything that I said or I professed or that I said I believed, and neither do you. But they were encouraged, of course, always to ask their own questions. Some of them didn't care. It wasn't a question. Didn't matter. Some of them, I would give a copy of Mark Anderson's book, Shakespeare by Another Name. And I always own more than one copy of that book, because I regularly give that book as a gift to people. And I've done so multiple times. And I'll commonly, I probably shouldn't give this secret away, but I'll commonly go online and see if I can find used copies somewhere that I can snatch up so that I can then give them away to someone to share with them this story. I have a flood of books, and this quest will lead to an extensive library for most of you. And so I caution you on that. But I also encourage you to go buy those books. Get them. They will change your journey. They will enhance your journey. They will change your lines of questioning. They will direct you one way or another. Some things will direct you completely away from something you believed before. Remember, I started with a man who told me it was Marlowe. Everything can change. Everything should change as we find more truth. I have a flood of books. I have an entire shelf committed to this topic. An entire bookshelf, not single shelf, like every shelf of a 5-shelf unit has books on this topic. I think that's probably true about a lot of longstanding Oxfordians. You, if you're new to this, do not have to do that. And you don't have to spend that money. You can find sources and details and information. Go to the SOF website, go to the DeVere Society website, go to the Shakespeare Authorship Coalition website. You'll find all kinds of resources there. Go to the Shakespeare Source Book. There's an episode about that just a few episodes ago. Go to the Shakespeare Source Book, and you will find all kinds of wonderful things there. That's Mark Alexander's site, and he was a guest not too long ago. Find that episode if you haven't listened to it already. But yes, a flood of books. And I'll tell you some of the ones that changed my life forever. Whittemore. And many of you who have discovered Whittemore know what I'm talking about. Whittemore changed the world for me. And you need to get not just the monument and not just the 100 Reasons, but also if you can get your hands on a copy of his one-man monodrama, that's informative too. And it's theatrical and it speaks to you in a different way. And when you read it, you imagine a man standing before you delivering it. And I'd like to perform that piece someday. And I've talked to Hank about trying to rewrite it and adapt it so that any actor can do it that isn't him. Because right now it's so first person him. If you find a copy of it, you'll know what I mean. But he's working on it. He's going to turn it into something that all of us can do, any actor can do. And I think it's going to be part of the paradigm, part of the shift. Children, Shakespeare Suppressed. You've got to have it. You've got to read it. You got to go there. These are titles that changed me by reading them. There are so many others and so many more that, like I said, I have multiple shelves stacked with these books, and almost, I'd say, I should do the math on this. I'd say 70% of my guests have written a book or published a book. That might be high, but at least half, I'd say at the very minimum, half of my guests have been here to talk about a book that they have written. And so the list, and you just go through the episodes, you'll find the great reading list of all of Oxfordianism. My second Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship Conference was in Ashland, Oregon. Ashland is still drivable, and at the time I didn't live in Southern Oregon at the time. I do now, but at the time I had family in Southern Oregon, so I knew, great, I have a place to stay that's 40 minutes away from the conference location. I can drive up, I can stay there and pay my conference registration, and my wife will still allow me to do so because it was also a thing of, hey, honey, I want to spend this money on doing this thing. And at the time she was aware of it all, but not really on board. And if you want to know more about how she became an Oxfordian, you can find the episodes where I interview her and talk to her about what it's like to be married into this. So I won't belabor that now. At that conference in Ashland, one of the things that I saw, because I'm a communications and marketing professional, and that's what I do for a living, was the need that this organization, the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship, had for changing their footprint, changing their presence, making their presence known, getting out there in publicity and marketing realms. And I spoke up at that conference multiple times when I had the opportunity, saying, well, here's what's missing. Here's what you need to be doing and you're not doing, and you need to be doing. You need to be embracing social media. You need to be sending out regular press releases. You need to be relevant, even if they're not getting picked up, even if nobody's paying attention. You need to be flooding the channels with content so that when somebody does pay attention and they look into it, they find a history of content. And not just YouTube videos, like content, this press release, this issue, like hit them, let them get to know you, right? Nothing came of it. I missed Chicago and Boston, I think were the next 2 years. They might have, in that order or maybe the other order. And finally, it was 3 years later, and the conference was in Oakland, California. Again, I could drive there. I could convince my wife to let me spend the money to take and the time to leave her with the children and take the weekend away to go be a part of the conference. I submitted for the first time to present and was granted the opportunity to present at the conference. You can find the YouTube video of my presentation at the Oakland conference where I talked about why it is so dangerous to modernize the texts of the Bard. That did not earn me a lot of friends here in Southern Oregon, I can tell you. But nonetheless, I stand behind the presentation, and no one has ever confronted me with a valid challenge to my findings. My doors were opened. So many doors were open to me as an Oxfordian that weekend, that October in Oakland. Previous to that conference was when Julie Sandys Bianchi came up with the idea that there should be a SOF sponsored podcast about this topic. And she's the creator of Don't Quill the Messenger from its initial spark. She brought that idea to the person she knew best, which is the producer and founder of this broadcast series. And that's Jake Lloyd Bacon from Dragon Wagon Radio. Most of you know who he is because we do an annual anniversary episode with Jake. And Jake and his significant other, Alexandra, are also featured in an early episode of this series about what it's like when new people come to this and find it and what kind of questions do they have, which is a great episode, by the way. If you haven't listened to it, go find it. Anyway, Julie's like, we should do this. And I know the guy who can do it. And Jake said, yes, I can do it. Julie's son is a podcast host on the Dragon Wagon Radio Network. And if you haven't looked into the additional programming that Dragon Wagon hosts, Don't Quill the Messenger is just one of like 20 different shows that you can find on the Dragon Wagon Network. Go check some of them out. You'll find some wonderful colleagues of mine there who create fantastic programming. And if you love podcasts, you'll find a wide variety of topics and things to choose from there. So do that if you haven't. Anyway, I digress. Getting back to Julie said, we should do this. Board said, yes, we should do this. Julie said, I know the guy who can do this. Jake said, yes, I can help you do this. And the original format, and when you listen to like the first 6, 7, 8 episodes of this show, you'll find that many of like 5 of those first 6 or 7 episodes are conversations being had by a group of 3 people that do not involve me. And I am providing just the intro and some middle segue and like the exit to those episodes. It might be 4 of those. I think it's 4 of those. And then there's one episode with Bonner and Don Rubin and me. And I provide the bumpers for that, but I'm also a part of that. And then everything else after that, I'm your host. And let me tell you how that happened. So we're in Oakland. We've all been asked, lots of members who are coming to the conference have been asked, would you like to be a member of an episode? Send your interest to Julie. So we did, and I did. And I was so thrilled to be paired with Bonner and Dawn. I knew it was going to be a great episode. And it is. If you listen to it, it's truly the episode that created Don't Quill the Messenger. It wasn't even called that yet. And that's something that you need to know. They didn't have a name at that point when that episode was first recorded. We all go into a hotel room in Oakland to record that episode. We record this great episode. It's a really great dynamic between the 3 of us, I think, if I do say so myself. And the episode is over, and Jake's in the room because he's producing the whole thing. And he turns to Julie and he turns to everybody in the room and he says, you guys are doing this backwards. You can't have a series without a host. This format of 3 people talking and 3 people talking and 3 people talking is informative, but it's not sustainable. It's not what podcasts are. And he says, if you want to do this right, you need a host. And he points at me and he says, and that guy needs to be your host. That's how it happened, ladies and gentlemen. There it is, right there. True story. In a hotel room in Oakland, Jake Lloyd Bacon pointed at me, said to these prominent Oxfordians in the room, that's the guy that you need to do this. And that's how I was chosen to be your host and guide through all of this. And now, more than 75 episodes later, here we are together with exponential growth of this magnificent podcast that I'll talk about a little bit later. But I'm so proud to be here with you, and I'm so grateful that you choose this podcast as one of your ways to spend an hour or so of your time every 2 weeks listening to this topic. And so thank you for allowing me into your car, your room, your house, your earbuds, wherever it is that you are, that you listen fortnightly to this series. So that's how I became the host. That same conference, several members of the board came to me and said, remember what you talked about 3 years ago in Ashland? We think that, and I was pushing that same point again in Oakland, we think that you're right and we should do something. And that's when the board of trustees said, we would like to contract you to serve as our public relations director. They had no idea at that time what it was going to look like. I had no idea what that was going to look like. Brian Wildenthal was awesome because he stepped in and said, okay, let's really put this down to brass tacks and figure out what it's going to be. And he and I worked together to put together what became the first contract that became then another contract. And suddenly I found I was doing double duty. I was the contracted public relations director and the volunteer host of this podcast series. And it was a lot. And at the same time, there were more books clouding my bookshelf that I was trying to voraciously read. And as I continued to welcome guests to this program and talk with them and read their publications and do my own research and ask my own questions, I became more and more intrigued with the Prince Tudor theory. I don't think that's a secret. I think you're all aware of that now. And that's where I am leaning. I will admit, we don't have proof of anything truly. That's the biggest problem. But circumstantial evidence continues to mount and grow. And I believe that the preponderance of the evidence, and I'll steal that term from some of my legal friends who are Oxfordians, the late Tom Renier, of course, Brian, who I mentioned earlier, Dorothea Dickerman, who I'm about to talk about even furthermore as we move on. But I would say the preponderance of the evidence says that that is what we should be trying to either A, prove, or B, completely destroy. And that all areas of research and discussion and debate need to focus on solving this issue first right now. That's my position. That is not the position of the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship, our sponsors. P.S. The views of the host of this program do not necessarily reflect the views of the sponsors or the producers of the program or the station or channel that the program is broadcast on. All views expressed are clearly those of the host and only the host. Hopefully that helps. But there it was. That's what I started finding, and that's what so many of you write to me about, that you're most intrigued by as well. And I think that we need to answer that question. Either get it off the table, and there are those who've said, don't ever talk about it. Well, that's not the way to get it off the table. The way to get off the table is to absolutely disprove it, dismiss it, figure out a way to kick it out, which we obviously have not been able to do, or embrace it and do our best to prove it and make it so through the record. And we're getting closer, I think, more and more to that. But this upsets people. This not only started upsetting people because I started sharing with you listeners more and more my feelings about this in season 2. And now here we are near the end of season 3, and it's becoming more and more prevalent. But there's been some angry opposition. In fact, the truth of the matter is, it's been a long-standing quarrel in this organization and throughout the Oxfordian movement. This has been best and most recently documented by Jim Warren and his giant volume, and it's a giant volume, but it's going to stand the test of time as the historical record of this movement. And when this movement blows up, that I believe it will, and the paradigm shift happens, Jim Warren has solidified himself in history as being the authority on the history of this movement with the volume he just produced. And unless someone comes up with something bigger or better, that's how it will go down. And if we all hope to achieve what we hope to achieve, we are going to solidify that for him. Because when this becomes a regular course of study in every learning institution in the world, which is that not our goal? Is that not what we want? We want everyone to be researching this and studying this. And I believe it can happen. And when this happens, his volume, his book will be required reading. There. I just put that in the universe. If you disagree with me, send me your emails. Contact at don'tquillthepodcast.com. Don'tquillthepodcast.com. Contact at don'tquillthepodcast.com. Jim Warren and his latest work will go down in history as the authority on the history. He doesn't pull punches. He doesn't embellish. He's a true researcher and a true historian, and he does a magnificent job in that book. And he well documents the long-standing quarrel that has plagued this movement about the Prince Tudor theories. Yes, we can't deny it. We can't walk away from it. The immediate past president of the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship entered into a giant war with several prominent members, some of whom we've had as guests here on the podcast series, through the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship newsletter last year. It's a quarterly newsletter, but through at least 3 issues, it became this back and forth. And John Hamill's a great guy. I love John Hamill, but one thing I'll say is, don't ever say to anyone, stop asking this question. We shouldn't talk about it. It's off limits. Not unless you can prove and dismiss it with proof. Otherwise, everything's on the table. Everything's in the limits. Keep asking questions. That's what I say to you every 2 weeks, right? That got really ugly. And now, just a couple episodes ago, Dorothea Dickerman was my guest for, I believe, what's her 3rd episode with us. And she just blew the doors open on some things with her research and her findings on the 2 original pieces with the name William Shakespeare upon them, which she calls twin poems. In a sense that they are a pair, they are inseparable pair that send a very clear message, and that message is all about the succession. I don't see craziness in this all being about the succession or the importance of the succession or how much the succession was weighing on the minds of every single prominent nobleman in Elizabethan England at that time. That's just like a historical thing right there. How much Shakespeare, the name William Shakespeare, Edward de Vere, or any of the reasons behind the name William Shakespeare or Shakespeare of Stratford or Edward or Ben Jonson, how much all of that was affected by the succession, that's what we need to be talking about. But we cannot deny that the succession was huge and was the most prominent thing. So how much did that play a part on all of this? I think once we answer that question, we're going to be in a really great place. And I think Dorothea has really hit on something new. It's earth-shattering. Will it cause another rift inside the Oxfordian movement? Well, I don't know. If you read Jim Warren's volume on the history, the 100 years of this, there are at least two major times when things got really bad over this topic. Are we approaching a third time? I don't know. I don't know, ladies and gentlemen. You will know. I can tell you this. I've had nothing but positive responses from all of you and many of you who have written to me, and by the way, I have forwarded all of them on to Dorothea with your comments, your questions, your counterpoints, but not disagreements. And I'm glad to get them, and she's glad to get them, and we love to receive them. P.S. If you disagree, we want to hear from you too. If you think that Dorothea is off her mark, or she needs to do better research here, or what, like the woman, look, she's a thick-skinned corporate lawyer who has done extremely well in a dog-eat-dog world of law and litigation. She can take it. Trust me. So send her your questions, send her your comments, send her your challenges, send them to me. But I'll tell you, over the 30 years that I have pursued this is what's making more and more sense for me. And I encourage you to do your own reading, your own research, and find your own questions. One thing I'll tell you is this episode of this now almost 3-year-old series is one of the last 4 or 5 episodes of the current contract between the SOF and Dragon Wagon Radio and me to continue to produce these episodes. The future of the season is in the hands of the Board of Trustees. I will tell you that Jake and I are both proud of the fact that this is an award-winning podcast series, not just award-winning for top excellence in the 37th Annual Communicator Awards, but also in the category of documentary, which I believe adds credibility to us in the way that says that this is about truth and history and real facts. So we're very proud of that. It's also the most common source of news coverage that the Oxfordian issue has had during the entire year of 2021. We love to receive emails from you, the listeners, regarding your comments, your recommendations, your complaints and criticisms. We're happy to have them. And we thank you all for the fact that this series has grown exponentially each year over the last 3 years. From year 1 to year 2, the number of downloads per year doubled. From year 2 to year 3, they doubled again. I think that's the true definition of exponential growth. We've also doubled the number of countries where we have listeners. Last year, 2020, we reached 43 independent countries and provinces. And this year, as of August, and I haven't looked at it too recently, I've been busy with things, but not too recently. But as of August, we had doubled that and we were at 96 countries and provinces. Now, granted, in a large number, like, look, I'm going to be honest with you. In a large number of those, we have one person or two people downloading regular episodes, right? Like I think we have one in Bahrain, for instance. But there's one person in Bahrain interested in this topic who found this podcast series. And maybe that person, and I hope he's listening or she's listening right now, and I hope that they will share this podcast with a friend, which is what I hope you will do as well. Because there are more than 200 something countries and provinces on the earth. And so we're behind. We could be reaching them all, and it's up to you to help us do that. You can also help fund this program. It's been a while since the SOF has put out a call for donations for specific reasons. But one thing you need to know is you can donate to the organization and you can earmark your donations. You can tell them you would like to support the research grant program that they do every year. They provide up to $20,000 a year. One of the greatest things about the organization, up to $20,000 a year is provided towards research to help answer this question. And you can donate to the organization and say, I want to support that. You can donate to the organization and say, I want to support the very popular, very successful video contest program. And there have been donors and sponsors who have supported that program and helped increase award money just this last year, in fact, to make sure that more people would be interested in getting involved in that very successful program that has done so much for outreach for the organization and the Oxfordian movement. You can also support this podcast. You can send in your donation. You can say, I want my money to go to help support the podcast. You can support conference costs and guest speakers. There have been donors who have sponsored presenters from foreign countries who were not necessarily able to afford the cost to fly from England or the Netherlands or wherever, or Russia or Thailand or wherever they might be coming from. And there have been members of the organization who said, I will pay for the plane flight and the hotel room for that presenter to come over here from overseas. We had a sponsor one time who paid who paid for Hank Whittemore. Paid for Hank Whittemore, not Frank. Look what I did there. I added for and Hank. For Hank. They paid for Hank to come to us to record episodes. And if you have a guest that you want to see on this program, you can do that too. You can help support the program, send in a donation, or contact us directly. I believe that arrangement was a listener who contacted us directly and said, I want to send Hank. He needs to be on. We did 2 episodes while Hank was here. It was awesome. And we've since done at least 2 or 3 more via remote. It's always better to have you in the room though, Hank. I love you, brother. It's always better to have any guest in the room when possible. But it is possible. You can make that happen. So one thing I want to tell you is, fellow Quillers, if you love this show and you want to see it continue, then you have the means to do so. And we'd love to see that happen. One of the things that I have raised is I think we should have quarterly reports as an organization that say how much money has come in for this thing or that thing, or how much is being spent for this thing or that thing each quarter. It's donors' money. They need to know. They should know. And those decisions should be transparent and open and available. And if the podcast series costs too much for its value, then that needs to be expressed as well. Right? Don't you think? I do. So anyway, I've also been in contact with the editor of the quarterly newsletter to say that I think some of you who are newcomers to the organization, new members, and memberships have also grown exponentially over the last couple of years, by the way. There was a 7% increase from 2019 to 2020, and then a almost 14% increase from 2020 to 2021. Or maybe it's 2019 to 2020, and then 2018 to 2019, 2019 to 2020. Anyway, exponential increases in membership. When you look at it, not in total membership, but in gains, if it's 7% this year and then 14% the next year, that's double the increase of gain. And that's you. That's you, folks. That's you, fellow Quillers who have joined the organization, and you have a voice, and you should let it be heard. So many of you are the new face of Oxfordianism and the new source of the future growth of Oxfordianism. If you want to help spread the word, talk about it. Tell people. Share this podcast. Share the SOF website. Share the DeVere Society website. Say, hey, here's something I came upon, or I'm looking at, or I'm following, or share the Facebook page. Share the Shakespeare Facebook page. Hey, you might be interested in this. Let me share this with you. Click on it. Buy some swag. Now, here's the shameless plug. This is the real shameless plug. But go to the Dragon Wagon Radio swag shop and buy some Don't Quill the Messenger merchandise. It is magnificent conversation starter. I have my coffee mug. I have my t-shirts. I have my hat. I have my face mask. Trust me, when I wear my mask, when I wear my face covering into a place, people immediately notice. And they almost always ask me about it because it's a face behind a face covering a face. The logo, if you know our logo, you'll know what I'm talking about. And it's a fabulous conversation starter. Go to the swag shop, order some swag. You also, at the same time, support Dragon Wagon Radio, the producers of this show. So it's a double win. And maybe you convert some new listeners. Open doors. Turn people on to the question. It's the greatest mystery of all time. Everybody loves a great mystery. Keep up the fight. Fellow Quillers, if there's anything I can say to you is we must keep up the fight. And more importantly than anything else, we must always keep asking questions.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a rating and review in your podcast player. For even more, visit our website, don'tquillthepodcast.com. There you can find official merchandise in our shop, as well as a link to our Patreon. This show is made possible by people like you. We hope you'll consider showing your support by becoming a monthly patron, where you'll receive bonus material and tons of exclusive perks. You can also join in the conversation on our Discord and by following us at Don't Quill the Pod on all social media. All of this can be found at don'tquillthepodcast.com, don'tquillthepodcast.com.
It's Dragon Wagon.